This isn't just about Shakur versus Teofimo, it's about control versus chaos. Some fights are won in the ring, this one starts in the mind. Face-offs aren't the fight, but they reveal intent, they reveal confidence, they reveal who's comfortable in the moment. Shakur fights with certainty and structure, Teo fights with emotion and momentum. And when Teo is right, that momentum becomes a storm. He's proven he can rise on big nights and take the crown off someone's head. So the first battle sign is simple. Who controls the atmosphere? If Teo is the hunter, why does he sound like he's negotiating? Why does Shakur sound like the champion in the room? Because fog only works if your opponent needs vision. Shakur's vision is elite, and Teo doesn't need clarity to change everything in one explosive moment. So let's jump straight in. So you have Shakur versus Lopez. Shakur Stevenson versus Teofimo Lopez. So we have two great fighters, two fighters trying to reach the top of the mountain. So what are the comparisons here? Let's jump straight in. So you have an orthodox fighter, such as Teo versus a southpaw, such as Shakur. And there's questions. What are the questions? Who has the greater power? Who hits the hardest? I think we've got to go with Teo on that one. I think he's naturally the bigger man. But who has the speed? This is close because Teo has speed, but I think Shakur maybe edges it out. Defense. I actually like the work that Teo does with his right hand. He catches counters really well with his right hand. But I think Shakur has an elite defense. And I feel like Teo has a good, maybe great defense, but I feel like Shakur's is elite. And when it comes to ring IQ, both have ring IQ. At the championship level, you must have ring IQ, but there's levels to ring IQ. There's like 1 to 10, or maybe 1 to 100, or 1 to 1,000. And I feel like you have to put Teo high on that list. But then I feel Shakur is higher on the list. So there's significant advantages for Shakur, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Shakur's going to win the fight, because every fight has a bunch of variables. So let's get into this. Let's talk about, and I addressed this briefly in another video, the psychological war has begun. And this is prefaced that every boxing match, or most boxing matches, has a chapter, and this is like the marketing chapter. And within that, you will have this psychological battle going on. And one of those moments, because those moments can be captured in various ways, whether it's the press conference, the face-off, and the weigh-in. So let's talk about the face-offs. What's important about a face-off? What's important? A face-off is not the fight. Therefore, if you win a face-off, it doesn't mean you win the fight. David Haye won the face-off against Klitschko, but he didn't win the fight. However, winning the face-off can have a psychological advantage. And you may be able to make an argument that it can contribute towards being favorable. Maybe. However, I think in a face-off, you can get a sense of a person. You can get a sense of, are they confident? Are they not confident? If someone's having a bad camp, how would they react? If someone's having a good camp, how would they react? How does a confident person interact in an engagement? Is it different to how someone who is not very confident? So a face-off can reveal things to the fighters. So when Shakur faces off with Teo, they're revealing parts of their personality, but they also might be revealing their confidence levels. And it also reveals stuff to the boxing public that are tuning in, that are watching. So in a sense, it reveals intent, it can reveal confidence, and it can also reveal who is confident in that moment. Remember, confidence can change. You can be not very confident in the lead up to a fight, but then the fight can come and then you can have, a lot of confidence. I think of the Joe Calzaghe when he fought Jeff Lacey, which was just a spectacular performance by Joe Calzaghe, one of the finest performances in the British ring. But allegedly he had, I don't know if he had an injury, but there was something happened in the build-up and they were considering pulling out. So that would test your psychology. That would test your confidence. However, despite having these issues with confidence, and despite having this issue with an injury and having some uncertainty, Calzaghe turned up and he delivered an absolutely phenomenal performance. So it's important that, in theory, you could maybe be doubting yourself in a face-off, but then you could perform amazingly in the ring. However, face-offs can reveal someone's state of mind. And I think the key lens here is that when I've seen Shakur, I've always seen someone who's very confident and he communicates in a very concise manner. And he had that confidence and he had that clear directness. I think that's a good thing. Teo, it feels like he's not, I don't say this in a disrespectful way, because obviously he's a warrior, he's a champion, but he seems to be a bit ambiguous with his communication style. And that could be intentional. He could be unpredictable on purpose. Maybe he's being, so there's various reasons why someone is being ambiguous. Number one, it's a reflection of their personality. But number two, they might be trying to take control of a conversation, not through direct aggression, but through passive aggression. So it's either a byproduct of his personality, of Teo's personality, or it's a strategy, or it's a combination of both. But I felt like Shakur was trying to lead the conversation because that's a natural reflection of his personality, and Teo was like dancing around stuff. So, but clearly, to me, Teo looks confident. He's keeping his cards close to his chest, but it's a different level of confidence. Because remember, individuals are different. Even though they're both fighters, they're both boxers, they will have different psychologies, different experiences, different training camps, different ways of thinking, etc. So let's talk about Shakur's ecosystem. We're talking about the mind, the authority, and the philosophy. So according to Shakur, because when you think of assessing someone, there's how we assess someone. Let's say if like people online, how the official boxing media critics assess someone, how the boxing public assesses someone, how a trainer assesses someone, how an opponent assesses someone, and also how an individual assesses themselves. When Shakur talks about his strength, he doesn't talk about his ring IQ, his speed, his counterpunching. He states it's his mind. I think that's quite powerful because the mind is such a powerful weapon in anything, whether you're working a job, let's say if you're working in a corporate job, your mind is important to be able to be stoic, to be able to maintain your composure. But also in elite level sports, the mind is important, whether it's in football, basketball, and or boxing. So if that premise is true, that his mind is his strongest weapon, it means that it's very unlikely that the occasion is going to get to him. Also, I've seen interviews where Shakur stated things like this. He stated that this is the fight that he's been waiting for. This fight is a reference to him fighting Teo. He feels that no one can beat him. That shows that he's very confident. And he wanted the Ring Magazine champion. No cherry picking. So the term cherry picking is about being selective. So say if, I want to fight, let's say Tom wants to fight John. Let's create some fictional characters. So Tom wants to fight John, not because he's the best, but because he knows he can beat him. So that would be cherry picking. So to not cherry pick would be to fight the hardest guy out there or a guy with the most credentials. And he also stated, and there's some integrity with that. There is integrity with that. There's like a sense of morality that you want to fight the best, not necessarily the person with the biggest brand, but the person with the best skills. Hence, no cherry picking. And then he stated this term that he wants to be in a position where they have no choice but to respect him. So this means that respect means a lot to him. And also we need to define they. I'm assuming they means maybe the boxing public, the boxing critics, his opponents, just basically the whole boxing fraternity. And this yearning for respect, I think it's a good thing. He's fighting with there's an objective. And then he states that speed means nothing when it's inaccurate. So, this concept in boxing, people will talk about what's more important, speed or power. So they've created this narrative bias that it's speed or power. Well, from his perspective, speed is irrelevant if it's inaccurate. And when you think about it, think of like a prime Mike Tyson. He had speed, he had power, but he also had accuracy. Think of Muhammad Ali. He had speed, he had power, but he also had accuracy. Think about the great Joe Louis. What a magnificent fighter. He had speed, he had power, he had accuracy. Sugar Ray Robinson, arguably the greatest fighter of all time. He had accuracy. So accuracy is something that we don't speak about. Also, you think of others like Pernell Whitaker, Floyd Mayweather, they had accuracy. So accuracy is a really important thing. And then he talks about the whole philosophy of boxing, which is to hit and not be hit. And you look at most of the great fighters follow that philosophy, like Andre Ward, Roy Jones in his prime, Sugar Ray Robinson. They follow that philosophy, Muhammad Ali. So in this sense, and then obviously you've got people that may not have followed that philosophy. I would argue that Joe Calzaghe is a great fighter, but I was thinking about someone else. I would argue that Rocky Marciano, who is 49-0, 49 wins, 0 losses, I would argue that he's a great fighter. But he clearly did not have that boxing philosophy of hit and not be hit. He had a different philosophy. He was punching the arms, he was working the body, and then as he would persevere through the fight and he would, tire you down, he would then create accuracy for what they call his Suzy Q, which was his right hand. And he would train immensely. He was maybe one of the greatest conditioned fighters of all time, but he didn't operate on the philosophy of not getting hit. Matter of fact, a byproduct of his style was getting hit because he had the shorter arms and he had to get in distance to be able to hit you on the arms, and again, when you hit someone's like left bicep, it makes it hard for them to throw the jab, hard for them to block. So it was a boxing art, it was a boxing science, but it was a different science. Shakur Stevenson doesn't fight like that. He has like the Floyd Mayweather mentality. And that's good because, you're likely to have a longer career if you do that. So what can we take from this? So if you look at like the Shakur fight that he would want, I feel like Shakur, he controls the distance with clever counters and clever defense. So if this turns into a technical fight, I feel like Shakur will have an advantage. So for me, it feels like Teo will have to really force the exchanges, force the pace, and put Shakur in a very uncomfortable position. The problem with that is that he will be susceptible to Shakur's counters if he doesn't attack intelligently. Now, also remember that Teo is also a good counterpuncher, so he will be trying to lure Shakur into his counterpunches with clever feints, going through the phases, then resetting, etc. So let's talk about Teo. So, of course, you have Teo's narrative is built on his achievements. He's had plenty of achievements. He's a world champion. And even though his presence in the face-off and in the press conference has been a bit ambiguous, I get the sense that that's maybe a psychological ploy. Like there's a book called 48 Laws of Power that was written by Robert Greene, and it talks about concealing your intentions. So I feel like there's a psychological ploy. But if you look at his resume, it's an impressive resume, a very impressive resume. And he's there because of his credibility. His actions, and we should judge people not purely on their words, but on their actions. His actions are of a world champion. So I'm not judging him on his vague language, on him keeping his cards close to his chest and his perceived passiveness. I'm judging him on his performances, and he's had some great performances. And even though I've stated that Shakur has a higher ring IQ, Teo has a high ring IQ. Teo has speed. Teo has power. Teo has good counterpunching ability. It's just whether it's on the level of Shakur. And maybe he'll prove us wrong. Maybe he has the higher ring IQ, and this is his opportunity to show. Again, I think Teo has to do a lot he can't turn this into a a pure chess match. I feel like he has to take Shakur out of his comfort zone. So it's very essential that he has, at the moment, he's being ambiguous, he's being passive. I'm hoping that his style and strategy in the ring is not ambiguous and passive, because he's going to need a very good strategy to be successful when they fight. Going back to that face-off, I remember Shakur was questioning some of Teo's victories, and one of the most impressive victories or names on Teo's resume is Lomachenko. And Lomachenko was a great fighter, a southpaw, and I believe that Teo inflicted the first defeat on Lomachenko. And you know, you look at that fight, and from my recollection in that fight, Teo dominated the beginning. When I say dominate, I don't mean he dominated in terms of brutalized Lomachenko. He took the early rounds, he built up a lead, and then Lomachenko came on at the end, but Teo was able to establish enough of a lead to be able to win the fight. And Shakur questioned that. He questioned the nature of the victory. And I feel like, again, this is Shakur trying to assert dominance. He obviously acknowledged the brand, he acknowledged the credibility of Lomachenko. How could you not acknowledge the credibility? Because that would be a lie. But then he criticized the context of the win, i.e., he mentioned that he implied that how much credit can you take for taking those early rounds if Lomachenko didn't throw any punches? So I thought that was, again, a bit of interesting mind games. Now, and we keep on referring back to the face-off, but in the face-off, again, there's this whole thing where if you need to rattle a fighter, you might do what some people would just call it cheating, or some people would call it like creative cheating, or I don't think you call it ring generalship, but you know, you're playing with the rules to try and get some type of advantage, or you're what they call playing dirty. And Teo had this hidden threat. Again, his communication was quite ambiguous, but he had this hidden threat that, you know, which implied that he might get a bit dirty. And Shakur stated, he reacted to that, and he stated that if you get dirty, things will be reciprocated. The way I interpret that is, if, say, for example, if Teo throws a low blow, Shakur will throw a low blow back. Teo will probably need to, or could get a bit rough in there to try and ruffle up Shakur psychologically, to try and force a mistake. So it'll be interesting to see if Teo does try to get rough in there, maybe with the elbows, with the head on the chest. Not necessarily, you know, if you hit someone low, that's deliberate. But you can get more rough, maybe push them, you know, just get quite dirty in the clinches, do some dirty boxing. And it'll be, if he presents that challenge to Shakur, the question will be, on what level has Shakur faced those type of challenges? And will he be able to reciprocate, number one, and will he be able to reciprocate while maintaining his boxing composure and stoicness? Because if he does reciprocate and he comes out of his boxing identity, then that could be an advantage for Teo. So that's, I think, something that's important. And I think, like, with regards to this fight, there's a lot going on with regards to, you know, the promotion. I think a lot of people are interested to see this fight anyway, but having that promotion of the press conferences and the face-offs, and having the two different personalities, the confident personality against the ambiguous, concealing intentions personality, I think that's going to really reveal something. So here's just a final point I want to make. And that point is the following: styles make fights. Styles make fights, not bravado, not necessarily resumes. It's all about the styles make fights. So let's give some examples. So the great late George Foreman, what do we think about when you think of George Foreman? I think of power, maybe the hardest puncher of all time. It's either him or Ernie Shavers. But then you think of 2 fights that he had, or 3 fights that he had. Joe Frazier, Ken Norton, and Muhammad Ali. When he fought Joe Frazier, another great fighter, he knocked Joe Frazier out in 2 rounds. Fought Ken Norton, another great fighter, knocked him out in 2 rounds. But then he fought Muhammad Ali. Now, Muhammad Ali lost to Joe Frazier, lost to Ken Norton. Yes, he did beat them as well, but he had losses against them. But yet Muhammad Ali lost to George Foreman in the 8th round in a tremendous event, a massive cultural event. Now, that doesn't happen unless styles make fights. So just because George Foreman beat Joe Frazier and Ken Norton in devastating fashion, you would assume that he would then beat Muhammad Ali because Muhammad Ali lost to both of those people. But he lost the fight. And we can go further with this. Like if you take the Deontay Wilder fight versus Tyson Fury, when they first fought, you know, you saw that Tyson Fury, even though the fight was a draw, Tyson Fury just, outboxed him. So that style, he just couldn't deal with that level IQ. Of course, Deontay Wilder would have fought people that boxed him before, but he hadn't met the IQ, the ring IQ of Tyson Fury. And in the first fight, I think he was thoroughly outboxed, but he did get the 2 knockdowns. But then in the second fight, so he couldn't deal with the boxing version of Tyson Fury, but he couldn't deal with the aggressive version of Tyson Fury, which came in the second fight. And the third fight was more of a, it was very savage and brutal fight, the third fight. But again, that's a style, because previously Deontay Wilder was undefeated, was knocking out everyone. And then you have like the Triple G and Canelo, and again, the context is important. Triple G was feared. He was a dominant champion. Abel Sanchez did a great job in creating the boxing environment and nurturing the great talent of Triple G. The first fight was a draw, but then the second and third fights, I think the second fight was relatively quite close, but then the third fight, Canelo was relatively dominant. And again, it's the style, because most people, I think, in the first fight would have had Triple G a significant favorite, but the resume doesn't dictate the outcome, or the resume doesn't always dictate the outcome. And then you have Sugar Ray Leonard. What a great fighter Sugar Ray Leonard was. I remember his 2 fights with Thomas Hearns, and he had the 2 fights with Roberto Duran. When he fought Marvin Hagler, another great fighter. When I think of Marvin Hagler, I think of southpaw, great work ethic, great fighter. And I think of the 3-round war with Thomas Hitman Hearns, which was an absolute amazing fight, back and forth. And at the time, when Sugar Ray Leonard fought Marvelous Hagler, Marvin Hagler was the favorite. But again, the resumes, and Sugar Ray Leonard had a great resume, but he was on the comeback, one of his many comebacks. But the style just was favorable to Sugar Ray Leonard, because styles make fights. And you can go further with it. You look at when Muhammad Ali first fought Sonny Liston. Sonny Liston was like the Mike Tyson of his day. He was so feared, and he would batter boxers. He was feared psychologically, and that psychological fear was predicated on what he could physically do. He also had a great jab, good power. But when he fought Muhammad Ali, he simply couldn't deal with that style. So styles make fights. So even though at the beginning of this video I spoke about the advantages that Shakur has, that doesn't necessarily mean that he wins the fight. Teo has a great opportunity for greatness, and there's various variables, because there's the style, there's the context, there's the camps. As I've stated before, fighters are often carrying injuries. You can have a good camp, you could have a bad camp. So if Teo has a great camp and Shakur has a bad camp, there's an advantage to Teo. If Teo has an injury, then that's an advantage to Shakur. If Teo is able to assert early dominance, or is able to make a strategic adaptation which hurts Shakur, then that's an advantage to Teo, and vice versa. So this is not set in stone. Even though it looks like Shakur has a lot of advantages here, these are 2 great fighters, and this is potentially going to be a great fight.